Zynga's offering is the biggest by any U.S. internet company since Google raised $1.9 billion in its 2004 IPO. Big or not, though, there is still debate over the future prospects for the company. Back with me to debate the pros and cons are Sam Hamada, CEO of Privco in New York, and in Chicago, independent research analyst Brian Bbolan. Brian, let's start with you. This whole idea that Zynga gets the majority of its revenue from a very, very small number of players. You're generally positive about Zynga, but isn't that a concern?
It's a slight concern, and it's probably the same concern that people voiced in the early days of Google, saying, who are these people who are actually clicking on ads? I don't click on ads. So in the same vein that Google had that obstacle to overcome, Zynga has the same thing. And then when people say, oh, it's a one-trick pony, much the way Google was a one-trick pony in ad sales online, so with Zynga, it's games online. I would love to be in that same position.
Sam, do you buy that? Do you think it's not as much of a concern as Brian is indicating here?
I think it's a little bit more of a concern than Brian's indicating, honestly. Actually, the reliance on whales is even worse than 5%. Actual paying users is actually more closer to 2.5% according to Privco research. So Zynga is entirely dependent on a very small number of people, which is fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with the freemium model, which is 97% of people don't pay, 3% of people pay, and it makes up for the rest of the 97%. The problem is that now Facebook is not the only game in town, if you will, like it was 2 years ago on Facebook. You have Electronic Arts moving in very aggressively with SimSocial, SimCity Social is now being prepped. Activision Blizzard is hitting a hard. Rovio with Angry Birds, which is privately held, is hitting the space hard. So the mind share for that very small number, you can expect is going to be aggressive. Just like casinos dangle bigger sweeps, jets, food, and so on, they're going to keep slugging it out for the small number of whales.
Brian, you don't seem to think that Electronic Arts and Activision really represent the big competition here, but as Sam pointed out, EA has more social games. They just bought PopCap, another social gaming company. I mean, isn't that a concern for a company like Zynga with all of this competition out there?
Well, as you look at competition, when you're talking about Electronic Arts and Activision, those gamers that are playing those games are hardcore. They're not sitting on a platform of a browser to play their games. They're on an Xbox, they're on a PS3, they're on a dedicated platform for an intense game experience. When you're talking about Zynga's users, they're casual gamers. They're intermittent throughout the day, coming off of a Facebook, off of a web browser. So the gaming experience is much different for someone that's a fan of an Activision, Call of Duty, Warcraft, any of those types of games, versus Farmville or Castleville or Zynga Poker. I think the real competition that Zynga has to look out for in the future is when online gambling becomes legalized and the casinos buy into it. We've already seen that with Boyd and MGM buying into Party Poker. So look for those real-term, tangible assets to come in and compete with Zynga Poker.
Now, I do want to ask one more question about Mark Pincus. Zynga, of course, revising its S1 filing today, adding the loss of Pincus as a risk factor. Sam, we've been seeing a lot of negative reports about Mark Pincus's management style, employees saying that they can't wait to leave the company and cash out of the IPO. In terms of retaining talent, how do you view that as a future challenge for this company?
Well, I think it's a negative, frankly, and I'm not sure Zynga would be hurt if Mark Pincus left. If he's watching, he's probably not thrilled to hear that, but it might even end up being a positive. This time next year, Mark Pincus left. There's plenty of probably other people that could, run this company, to be honest with you. And really, what's very expensive here is game development. And game development only gets more and more expensive. The first thing of games were very rudimentary, something my grandmother could play. That's not true. These are becoming more and more sophisticated, more graphic intensive. The price to produce a hit goes from about $10, $20 million, which is what it was about 2 years ago. Now the average social game costs about $100 million. So it becomes, the business model becomes much more analogous to a movie studio, where you're really trying to get the next big hit, and each big blockbuster becomes more and more costly. Game talent will be...
Sam Hamada of Privco and Brian Bbolan, independent research analyst. Thanks for joining us and debating here on Bloomberg Watch.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Coming up, Flipboard's new iPhone app hits 1 million downloads.